The boy's small, dust-covered hands pushed weakly against the unyielding surface, his sobs muffled by the thick layer of brick and plaster. "Please?" His tiny voice cracked, a desperate, hollow sound in the cramped darkness. "Please, let me out." From the other side, a low, mocking laugh was the only reply. "You're like a little mouse in the walls." The older boy's voice dripped with cruel amusement. "No one's coming for you. Just sit in there and think about what a weak little crybaby you are. Before we uncover the shocking truth of what happened in that mansion, make sure you're part of this journey with us." If stories of injustice, breathtaking courage, and the unbreakable bond of a mother's love are what you live for, then you're in the right place. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to witness is a story you will not forget. The Grand Hall of the Kensington Estate was a masterpiece of opulence, a glittering jewel box designed to showcase the very best of society. Golden chandeliers, each crystal prism catching and fracturing the light, hung like frozen constellations from a vaulted ceiling. Below, a sea of polished marble reflected the shimmering gowns and tailored suits of the guests, their laughter and the gentle clinking of champagne flutes weaving a tapestry of effortless wealth. It was a charity gala, the social event of the season, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen, to make donations with flourish and discuss art and politics in hushed, important tones. The air smelled of expensive perfume and delicate hors d'oeuvres. It was a world of soft edges and bright lights, a world that seemed utterly removed from any notion of true suffering. Unseen in this panorama of luxury was a small, forgotten corridor, a servant's passage leading off from the main hall. The transition was stark. The warm, golden light from the chandeliers did not penetrate here, replaced by the cold, blue-tinged glow of utilitarian LED strips. The polished marble gave way to rough, unfinished concrete, and it was here, in this shadowy liminal space, that a scene of profound cruelty was unfolding. The wall in this corridor was half-finished, a patchwork of exposed studs, snaking electrical wires, and newly laid drywall that had yet to be taped and painted. A stack of bricks, bags of setting compound, and a set of trowels sat nearby, silent witnesses to the ongoing renovation. 7-year-old Leo stood trembling before the gap in the wall, his eyes wide with a fear so pure it seemed to swallow him whole. He was small for his age, a wisp of a boy with a dusting of freckles across his nose, now streaked with tears. His best shirt, a crisp white button up his mother had carefully ironed for the event, was smudged with gray handprints. His small hands, clenched into helpless fists, were covered in a fine white powder from the drywall. Looming over him was Carter, a young man of 18 who seemed to embody a completely different species of existence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his confidence as solid as the mansion's foundations. He wore a vibrant yellow varsity jacket, a bold emblem of his status as a high school football star, the letterman's patch a badge of honor. Right now, that badge felt like a flag of tyranny. A smirk played on his lips, not a smile of joy, but one of cold, calculated entertainment. He found Leo's terror amusing. "It's just a game, kid," Carter said, his voice a low, condescending drawl. He gestured to the dark, cobweb-dusted cavity between the studs. "It's a secret clubhouse. Don't you want to see what it's like in there?" Leo shook his head violently, fresh tears welling in his eyes. "No, I don't. I'm scared. I want my mom." "Your mom is busy schmoozing with the grown-ups," Carter sneered. "She doesn't have time for a baby. Now, get in." "I won't ask again." He took a menacing step forward, his large frame casting a long shadow that engulfed the small boy. Whimpering, Leo had no choice. He was too small, too weak to resist. He reluctantly stepped into the narrow, dark space, his little body trembling uncontrollably. The space was terrifyingly small, barely wider than his shoulders, and it smelled of damp concrete and isolation. "See, not so bad," Carter said, his smirk widening. Then, in a move of shocking swiftness, he grabbed a large, pre-cut sheet of drywall that was leaning against the adjacent wall. "Now for the door." "No," Leo cried out, his voice shrill with panic. "Don't, please," but Carter ignored him. He hefted the heavy sheet and slammed it into place over the opening, plunging Leo into near-total darkness. The only light now was a thin, terrifying sliver at the bottom of the board. Leo's world shrank to the size of a coffin. He could hear the muffled sounds of the party, the laughter, the music, a world of joy that was now cruelly inaccessible. He pressed his hands against the cool, unyielding surface of the drywall. "Let me out!" He screamed, his voice cracking with the strain. From the other side, Carter's laughter was a low, hateful rumble. He picked up a power drill from the tool set. The high-pitched whirring sound was a sound of pure horror to Leo, a mechanical monster gnashing its teeth. With 3 precise thunks, Carter drove thick, coarse, threaded drywall screws through the board and into the wooden stud behind it, sealing the boy in. 1 screw at the top, 1 in the middle, 1 at the bottom. Each one was a nail in the coffin of Leo's hope. "You're like a little mouse in the walls," Carter taunted, his voice clear through the barrier. "No one's coming for you. The music's too loud. Just sit in there and think about what a weak little crybaby you are." He gave the drywall a final, contemptuous slap. "See you later, mouse." And with that, his footsteps receded, fading back into the sounds of the gala, leaving Leo alone in the crushing, silent darkness. Leo slid down, his back against the rough interior of the wall. The sobs came then, great, heaving gasps that racked his small body. He curled into a ball, his face buried in his knees, the dust from the construction coating his tears, turning them into muddy tracks on his cheeks. He was trapped, he was alone, and the one person who could make it all better was a world away, unaware that her entire universe was imprisoned behind a wall. That person was his mother, Evelyn. She was a woman in her mid-30s, whose quiet elegance belied a core of tempered steel. She wasn't a guest of honor, but one of the event staff, a coordinator hired to ensure the evening's flawless execution. For the last hour, she had been circulating through the crowd with a practiced smile, directing servers, checking on the caterers, her mind a checklist of 1,000 tiny details. But beneath the professional exterior, a mother's instinct was humming, a low-grade alarm she couldn't quiet. She had last seen Leo sitting quietly in a corner, coloring in a book she'd brought for him. That was over 20 minutes ago. A cold trickle of unease ran down her spine. She excused herself from a conversation with the event photographer and began to move through the crowd, her eyes scanning the room. He wasn't by the dessert table. He wasn't watching the ice sculptor. The smile remained fixed on her face, a mask for the growing panic. He's just exploring, she told herself. He found a quiet spot to read. But the excuses felt hollow. She moved towards the edges of the grand hall, her gaze sharp, missing nothing. It was then that she saw Carter emerging from the service corridor. He smoothed down his yellow varsity jacket, a look of smug satisfaction on his face that struck Evelyn as deeply off-key. Why would the star quarterback be slipping out of a dusty, off-limits construction zone? Her eyes narrowed. Without a second thought, she slipped into the corridor after him. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The music and laughter became distant, replaced by the hum of a nearby electrical panel and the sound of her own quickening heartbeat. And then, she heard it. Faint at first, so faint it could have been the whine of a distant machine. But it wasn't. It was a sob, a child's sob, her child's sob. Her blood ran cold. She followed the sound, her heels clicking softly on the concrete floor. It led her to the half-finished wall. And there it was, undeniable. The crying was coming from inside the wall. Her mind, for a single horrifying second, refused to process it. It was impossible, a nightmare. But the raw, gut-wrenching fear in that cry was all too real. It was Leo. She rushed forward, her professional composure shattering. "Leo," she called out, her voice trembling. "Baby, are you in there?" From inside the wall, the crying hitched. "Mummy," came the tiny, terrified reply. "Mommy, I can't get out! He put me in here!" A rage, cold and sharp and more powerful than any emotion she had ever known, erupted within Evelyn. It was a primal force, a tectonic shift in her soul. The image of Carter's smug face flashed in her mind. The yellow jacket, the smirk, he had done this. He had trapped her son, her beautiful, gentle boy, inside a wall like a piece of forgotten rubbish. She saw the 3 drywall screws, shiny and new, driven deep into the studs, holding the temporary prison wall in place. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled not with fear, but with a ferocious need to act. She dropped to her knees, pressing her face close to the sliver of light at the bottom of the drywall. "I'm here, my love. Mummy's right here. I'm going to get you out. Don't be scared." Her voice was a forced calm, a lifeline she threw into the darkness. But the calm was a lie. Inside, a storm was raging. She looked around, her eyes wild. She needed a tool, something to get those screws out. The power drill Carter had used was gone. The toolset nearby had only a hammer and a few wrenches, nothing that could reverse the cruel efficiency of the power tool. Her gaze fell upon the stack of bricks. An idea, dark and terrible and born of that cold rage, began to form. It was not an idea of rescue. It was an idea of reckoning. She stood up, her body thrumming with purpose. The sounds of the party seemed to swell for a moment, a reminder of the world of casual privilege that had produced a boy like Carter. A boy who could commit such an act and simply walk away to enjoy a canapé. She would not simply unscrew his handiwork. She would not give him the dignity of a quiet fix. He wanted to hide his cruelty in the shadows. She would expose it to the brightest lights imaginable. She walked back into the grand hall, and the transformation was complete. The anxious mother was gone. In her place was an avenger, her face a pale, composed mask of fury. She moved through the crowd with a new, terrifying grace, her eyes locked on her target. She found the estate's owner, a portly, jovial man named Mr. Delaney, who was holding court near the champagne fountain. "Mr. Delaney," she said, her voice low but cutting through the chatter around him. He turned, his smile faltering slightly at the intensity in her eyes. "Evelyn, everything all right? The canapés are divine." "No," she said, her voice trembling not with weakness but with controlled wrath. "Everything is not all right. Your guest, Carter, the boy in the yellow jacket, he has trapped my 7-year-old son inside a wall in the service corridor." Mr. Delaney blinked, his brain struggling to compute the sentence. "Trapped inside a wall. Evelyn, that's impossible. A prank." "Surely, it is not a prank," she interrupted, her voice like shattering glass. "My son is crying, terrified, sealed behind a wall with 3 screws, and you are going to help me, now. Bring Carter, bring everyone." The authority in her voice was absolute. It brooked no argument. Mr. Delaney, flustered and suddenly pale, nodded mutely. He gestured to a few of his security staff, his instructions hushed and urgent. Evelyn turned and strode back toward the corridor, not waiting for them. She knew they would follow. Back in the gloomy passage, she knelt again. "I'm back, Leo. I'm right here. Help is coming." She could hear his ragged breathing, could feel his terror through the wall. It fueled the fire inside her. Minutes later, a confused and murmuring crowd began to filter into the corridor, led by a very uncomfortable Mr. Delaney. The guests, clutching their champagne flutes, looked around in bewilderment. This was not part of the evening's entertainment. And then, Carter was pushed to the front by a security guard, his smirk now replaced by a look of arrogant confusion. "What is this?" he demanded, his eyes flicking from Mr. Delaney to Evelyn. "What's going on?" Evelyn rose to her feet. She didn't look at Carter. She looked at the crowd. She pointed a steady finger at the sealed drywall. "My son," she said, her voice clear and carrying silencing the murmurs, "is in there. 7 years old. Your star athlete, Carter, sealed him in here as a game. He screwed him into the wall and left him to scream." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Disbelief, horror, and a dawning, ugly realization dawned on their faces. "That's a lie," Carter blustered, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "She's crazy." The kid's probably just hiding. It was then that Leo, hearing the commotion, let out another desperate, heart-stopping wail. "Mama, mine." The sound was unmistakable. It was coming from inside the wall. The crowd recoiled as one. The evidence was irrefutable. Evelyn finally turned her gaze to Carter. It was not a look of shouted accusations or hysterics. It was a look of such profound, icy contempt that he actually took a step backward. "You put him in with a drill," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Now you will get him out. With your hands." Mr. Delaney, his face ashen, nodded to a security guard who produced a single, flat, head screwdriver from a utility belt. He handed it to Carter, whose hands were now shaking. "Do it," Mr. Delaney commanded, his voice thick with disgust. Under the unforgiving gaze of 50 of the city's most influential people, Carter had no choice. He knelt before the wall, the eyes of the crowd burning into his back. The yellow of his varsity jacket, once a symbol of triumph, now looked like a badge of shame. He fumbled with the screwdriver, trying to fit it into the star-shaped head of the first screw. It was the wrong tool. It slipped, scraping uselessly against the metal. He grunted with effort, his face flushing red with a mixture of exertion and utter humiliation. This was not the kind of strength he was used to. This was not lifting weights or pushing on a field. This was a public undoing. Evelyn watched him, her arms crossed, her expression unchanging. She made no move to help. She let him struggle. Let him feel the frustration, the impotence, the crushing weight of every judgmental stare. Let him understand in this small, tangible way a fraction of the terror he had inflicted upon her son. After what felt like an eternity, he managed to loosen the first screw. It came out with a screech of protesting metal. A sliver of light widened. A second small, dusty hand joined Leo's at the opening. The crowd leaned in, a unified breath held in 50 lungs. Carter moved to the second screw, his movements clumsy and panicked. The screwdriver slipped again, and he cursed under his breath. The audience tutted and murmured, their disapproval of physical force. He was unraveling in real time, his cool bullying persona stripped away to reveal a weak, pathetic core. Finally, the second screw came free. He was working on the third and final screw when Evelyn moved. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was not gentle. It was a command. He froze, looking up at her, his eyes wide with a fear he had never known. "Stop," she said. The entire corridor fell into a dead silence. Even Leo's crying had quieted to whimpers. All that could be heard was the distant, oblivious music from the hall. Evelyn's eyes never left Carter's. "You used a machine to put him in," she said, her voice low but echoing in the silence. "You don't get to use a tool to let him out. Not even that pathetic one." She leaned down, her face inches from his. "You will use your hands." A wave of shocked whispers passed through the crowd. Carter stared at her, his mouth agape. That's impossible," he stammered. "Is it?" Evelyn's voice was deadly calm. "You think your strength is for hurting, for showing off? Then prove it. Prove it's for something else. Or sit there and show everyone that the great Carter is only strong when he's preying on those who can't fight back." The challenge hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. It was a test not just of physical strength, but of character, played out on the most public of stages. Carter was trapped, just as surely as Leo had been. His reputation, his future, his entire identity was on the line. With a look of sheer desperation, he dropped the screwdriver. It clattered loudly on the concrete floor. He looked at the drywall sheet, secured by one final screw at the bottom. He braced his hands against the edge of the board, his knuckles white. He took a deep breath, his muscles straining against the fabric of his prized jacket. A vein throbbed in his forehead. He pulled. Nothing. The drywall was heavy, and the one remaining screw held it fast. He repositioned himself, grunting with the effort. The crowd was utterly silent, watching this brutal, primitive spectacle. He pulled again, a raw, guttural cry escaping his lips. There was a sharp, cracking sound. Not the drywall, but the sound of a fingernail tearing. He cried out in pain, but he didn't stop. He pulled again, his face a grotesque mask of strain and shame. With a final, splintering crack, the drywall ripped free from the lone screw, tearing a jagged hole around it. The board swung open, and there, curled in a ball on the floor, covered in dust and tears, was Leo. He was shaking, his eyes squeezed shut against the sudden light. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then Evelyn was there. She didn't look at Carter, who was now slumped against the opposite wall, cradling his bleeding hand, his spirit broken. She only had eyes for her son. She knelt and gathered him into her arms, pulling him out of the darkness and into the light. He clung to her, burying his face in her neck, his small body trembling against hers. "It's over, my love," she whispered into his hair, her voice finally breaking with the release of emotion. "Mommy's here. You're safe. It's all over." She stood, holding her son, his legs wrapped around her waist. She turned to face the crowd. Their expressions were a mix of awe, pity, and unadulterated outrage. Not at her, but at the boy who had caused this. She looked at Mr. Delaney. "I believe the police should be called." He simply nodded, too horrified to speak. Evelyn walked through the crowd, which parted for her like the Red Sea. They were no longer looking at an event coordinator. They were looking at a force of nature. She carried her son out of the gloomy corridor, away from the scene of his trauma, and back into the warm, golden light of the grand hall. The party was still going on, but for Evelyn and Leo the world had irrevocably changed. He was safe in her arms, where he would always belong. And the sound of Carter's social demise, a silence more profound than any scream, was the music of a justice that could never be appealed. This story is a testament to the fact that a mother's love is the most powerful force on earth, a force that can tear down walls, both physical and metaphorical. It leaves us with a question, a simple one, to connect all of us who have been moved by this moment. From which part of the country are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments below.